on about Barry White, Bill, you're the wrong gender.
Oh. Well, you could be playing the Barry White in the background while I'm with my wife. I didn't mean you. I'm not that way.
That's right. Whether you're singing or listening.
That's right.
Okay.
That's like it was on Carson one time when he asked Frank Sinatra what he played when he was trying to, get somewhere with his lady, and I forget what Sinatra said, but it was hilarious,
We are live, folks.
Hi, Mike's joined.
Mr. Chairman, we are live.
We're online. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have our members present? Anybody know?
Bill's here. I think everybody's here now.
Okay. Andre here?
I'm here, Mike.
Okay, thank you. With that, at this time, I will call the State Board of Elections meeting to order. And as the first item of business, we'll determine if there is a quorum present. The chair is present. Mr. Hogan. Mr. Hogan, are you present?
Present.
Ms. Howells, are you present?
Present.
Mr. Fun, are you present?
Present.
Mr. Velp, are you present?
Present.
All members being present, declare a quorum to be present. Additions to the agenda. Does anyone have any additions to the agenda? We have one item that's going to effectively be an addition to the agenda, and that is going to be what's now item number 9. So I don't know that will end up being a separate agenda item or not besides that one. Does anyone have any other additions to the agenda? All right. With that, the next item is one that I requested be put onto the agenda, and that is the chairman's comments to the state and local election staff. Some of you, perhaps even many of you, may have heard the legislative hearing that took place yesterday. And if so, I think that's great. And you may have gotten from that a sense of how we feel about the work that was done during the election. As we noted, the elections weren't perfect. And we know that, and in fact, we have a number of documents that are now coming to us pointing out items that went wrong in a variety of places. And we're going to be going over some of those. We're going to be dealing with them and issues relating to the June election, not just today, but into the future as well. But what I wanted to say to all of you who worked on the elections, who were out in the trenches, is how very proud we are of the work that you've done. And I want to read to you what is one of my favorite quotations. It's one that I've read to other people and one that I've pondered myself from time to time, and I want to share it with you. So quotation was spoken by Theodore Roosevelt in April of 1910. And he said this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, come short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the least fails while daring greatly, well, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that this place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. You were in the arena, you men and women that work with us on this great project of democracy, and we are proud of you. Just not to say that we're not going to have a few moments where we're going to say things, but we are proud of you. This is something the members didn't know that I was going to say what I just said. They know how I feel, but I would not, if anyone wants us to add something to that, they're welcome to do so, but not required.
Yeah.
Well said, Mike.
Yeah, and Mike, I just want to add that I think that when you ask anyone under any circumstance to 6 weeks prior to an election you're trying to hold, to do it in a different manner than how you've done it for years, that is a monumental task. And I think that the staff have performed admirably and worked hard to do what is necessary to try to do the impossible. And, does that mean there isn't things to correct? Of course not. You would have bet going into it that there would be things to correct because, again, you're turning on a dime. And I have defended to others and in other venues the efforts that have been made, and I will continue to do that, and I continue to support our staff and the LBE staff.
Anyone else?
This is PJ Hogan. I can't say it more eloquently than you did, Mr. Chairman. I concur with everything you just said, and I thank everyone who worked on the June 2nd and April 28th elections. Thank you.
All right, and with that, we'll now move on to the administrator's report, item number 4 on the agenda. And Nikki, I believe you're going to handle that.
Well, I'm going to very quickly turn it over to Art and then proceed through the agenda, through the administrator's report with the person who's responsible. So Art gets to start off and then it moves to Mary.
Okay.
Actually, I would like to just thank you all for your kind words and your support. And I know that I speak on behalf of the entire elections community from the state board and the local boards of elections. And so thank you for your kind words and your support for us and the tough questions that you'll be asking. And those are fair, and we're happy to take them and answer them and put in place changes that we need to do for November. So, we've learned a lot and we look forward to making the necessary adjustments. And now I'll turn it over to Art.
Thank you. I'm going to add one little thing to that. I've only been here a couple of months, but I have to say how proud I am to work with this team, especially seeing the hardship. Hardship may or may not be the right word, but just the difficult circumstances. It's been amazing being in the trenches, or at least watching the folks in the trenches. So I just wanted to echo that. Now, on a different note, last week, June 10th, the Maryland Cybersecurity Council met. They met remotely. The meeting was primarily a presentation from Admiral Tom Wheeler and David Simpson on recent Brookings Institute, where they had talking about the future of 5G cellular technology in the U.S. And what new security approaches may be needed to protect federal, state, and local infrastructures. There is some points there that will be relevant in a few years, not now, but in a few years, to the election process and the communications that happened there. But beyond that, there was no new business. I can turn it back to you, Nikki.
This is Mike. Before you get off the line, I guess it's really for Art and Nikki. That sounds like something which we should schedule for a briefing for the board. Not in our next meeting, and probably not the one after that, but it is something I think the board should be acquainted with. And if we can educate people earlier on these subjects, that's better than educating them when it's, something's going on and we're compressing things. So I'd like to have this put into some sort of a slot down the road as one of our security briefings. All right.
I'm all for it. I would include Fred in that discussion as well.
Whatever you think's appropriate.
Right.
Whatever and whoever.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm sorry, Mike, this is Mary. And I want to echo Nikki and Art's sentiments. Thank you very much for everybody's kind sentiments. So voter registration, MD Voters, our statewide voter registration database. As I reported last month, we continue to do user acceptance testing for our July deployment. It is a quite large deployment with over 80 plus issues. So the whole team is working really hard. Testing is going very, very well. We are very pleased with the development and what has been given to us to test. MVA transactions, every month I report on that. I will go over the numbers. New registrations, 475. Residential address changes, 9,281. Last name changes, 280. Political party changes, 1,253. And with the virus shutting everybody down, I'm sorry, I don't have any information on non-citizens. So with that, unless there's any questions, I will turn it over to Jared.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
This is PJ. I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so since this was our first vote by mail, there was a number of ballots that were returned undeliverable. What is being done to now look at those and I don't even know how to ask the question. I mean, how to deal with those undeliverable ones. Obviously, people have moved. We certainly don't want to mail out let's say we have a vote by mail election in November. We don't want to mail to those same individuals at those same addresses and have a bunch of undeliverables again. What's the plan to deal with that?
And we are talking about that, PJ. We're looking at several different methods. We clearly don't want to start the MVRA process and possibly put them in inactive. So we're looking at a separate mailing to reach out to those people. Also look at reaching out to other agencies and really try to get some innovative ways to get the best data. So we're talking about that right now.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, if it was being dealt with in some form or fashion. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, all right. Then I will do the candidacy and campaign finance portion now. Over 92% of all the campaign finance reports have been filed for the presidential pre-primary 1 and 2 reports. Winners from the primary election that filed late must pay their late fees by August 4th or have their nominations vacated. And currently, the division is in contact with those candidates. June 1st was the filing deadline for the Title 14 business disclosure, contribution disclosure statements. We had 826 statements filed, and this represents nearly 100% of all the registered entities in the system. So that was very successful filing for us. Enforcement, we had two actions. The committee to elect Rain Pryor paid $25 for an unauthorized method of which was cash greater than $25. And Baltimore for David Warnock paid $50 for failure to record all contributions received on campaign finance report. Finally, the deadline to file a declaration of intent as a petition or non-principal political party candidate is July 6th at 5 p.m. And we are equipped to handle remote filings and have been in contact with several candidates that want to file. With that, I'll turn it over, unless there's any questions, I'll turn it over to Keith.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of items I'd like to report today. On inventory management, the FY 2020 inventory, which began on March 1st and will is scheduled to end on the 30th of this month. You know, at this present time, and we'll make this correction, there's 68% of the equipment and supplies have been inventory audited. We'll let you know that we received back at our warehouse those 75 ballot drop boxes after the election. We checked for any issues and damage to the drop-off boxes, and we learned about 8 pinhole gaps that were on the top between metal plates of the drop boxes, which could cause a leak possibly. And we went through though, and we filled all those gaps in order to eliminate any possibility of that. As it pertains to the 2022 poll book project, we continue with the planning related tasks for the project. That includes making additional updates to the project management documentation, which is now being peer reviewed by SPE prior to the submission of the documentation to the Department of Information Technology. We continued identifying requirements for the poll book solution. We completed the interviews for 10 contract project candidates for 3 positions. The individuals are expected to start sometime in July. And then finally, the continued work on other aspects of the project that include project requirements and include other project and requirements and contingency plan development. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Keith. I don't know if this is the appropriate time. We're sort of in that field, but the drop boxes. Could somebody give me an idea? The drop boxes turned out to be a pretty popular kind of alternative. And can somebody give me an idea of how we're looking at drop boxes for future elections and what actions we may be taking?
This is Nikki. So yes, it's very clear that the voters enjoyed them. We are collecting data to understand how many ballots were returned via that method. But Stuart Harvey, the election director for Frederick County, reported on Tuesday that almost 15% of the ballots he received back were received through the drop boxes. So I'm happy that that was such a great solution for people, including me. I dropped my ballot off. And Mary and Shafiq have started talking with the vendor about the timeline for ordering more for the November election. And then the next step is for us to work with the local boards to determine how many more they would like in each county.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nikki. Any questions from any of the members? Okay. Okay, next item on the agenda, I believe that completes the administrator's report. And we're now into item number 5, review of the June 2nd election. And who's going to?
I think the team is going to present this. This is Linda. I just want to echo Nikki's thought a while ago to thank all the board members for their support throughout this past election season, and let you all and our voters know that we are committed to making the changes needed and ensuring that the mistakes are not repeated, because we want to have a very successful November election And we are looking forward to continue to work with you, members of the board, to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks. So you should have, as part of your materials, a 5-page document that's entitled June 2nd Preliminary Review. Just highlighting it's preliminary because a lot of the data that we typically present to you at a post-election meeting is not yet available. So that data comes from MD Voters, the statewide voter registration, election management, and candidacy system. And until the local boards have finished all of their data entry and it's closed, in quotes, the data, we have to just wait for that. So we have a little bit of data, but we'll be able to provide much more over the coming weeks. We've shared with you about the voter education effort that we put in place just before the April 28th special general election, and then a larger campaign for the June 2nd. And so it was very clear that voters knew there was an election. They knew it was a vote by mail election. And if they couldn't vote by mail, how they could do that. We were fortunate to have a very dedicated and diverse team supporting this effort, and are proud of the work that they did in telling voters about this new way of voting. Earlier this week, we did provide you with the 145-page report from this effort, and I just want to share some of the highlights. So it was a statewide campaign that included TV, radio, digital, earned media, and grassroots and community-based efforts. Over just 3 weeks, there were over 84 million impressions, over 4 million views of our videos, 500,000 clicks on the ads, and the team placed more than 225 articles in media outlets around the state. And then there were, behind the scenes, nearly 700 organizations and coalitions that shared information with their members. So it included things like American Legion clubs, AARP, American Association of Retired People, to chambers of commerce. The list is long, and they were critical to getting the information from our team and distributing it in all sorts of ways to their membership. And then there was some additional efforts in Baltimore City, dropping some flyers to share this information with Baltimore City residents. Because of the understanding and some of the difficult, the communities that have a difficulty receiving mail, there were some extra efforts to reach out to those communities, which included the flyer drops, as well as specific efforts to reach out to voters in the African American community and the Latinx community. There were 2 companies part of our team that led that effort. And I want to shout out to Gilberto Zelaya of the Montgomery County Board of Elections, who was the face of our Spanish-speaking outreach efforts. So that was in addition to his normal workload, and think that he deserves our kudos as well. So turnout was impressive. We had almost 1.5 million voters participate in this election. The turnout was just over 41%. So over the last 20 years, it looks like only the 2008 primary election had higher turnout. And we had several counties where turnout in this election exceeded the 2016 primary election. And those counties are listed in that, and it's Baltimore City, Charles, Kent, Prince George's, Cecil, Montgomery, and Calvert. And they ranged from about a 1% increase to 9% increase from 2016. The city, of course, they were the focus with having their whole slate of local offices on the ballot. They saw a 3% increase in turnout from the 2016 primary election. Most voters did vote the ballot. They either received in the mail or received electronically. So we were, like the April 28th election, successful in getting people to participate by mail. The message of vote safe, vote at home resonated. And as I mentioned earlier in response to the chairman's question about the ballot drop-off boxes, they were well used, and we are compiling that data to show what percentage of ballots were returned via that method versus by mail. And then I will turn it over to Aaron to talk about the next set of information.
Yep, thank you, Nikki. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm just going to cover the section about online ballot delivery. So SBE sent emails to approximately 50,100 voters to download their ballot from the website. Approximately 32,932 of these voters logged into their online accounts. And then there's a table there that shows the type of voter requesting an electronic ballot and how the voter chose to mark that ballot. And if you, hold on, I have to scroll down just a little bit. So the table shows that about 61% of our domestic civilian voters chose to mark their ballot by hand. And then about 39% of domestic civilian voters decided to use the ballot marking tool. And then for our UOCAVA voters, about 53% of those voters decided to mark their ballot by hand. And about 47% of UOCAVA voters decided to mark their ballot using the ballot marking tool. Again, we had 60% of all voters mark their ballot by hand, and 40% of combined voters use the ballot marking tool.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yes, this is Kelly, and I just want to point something out. This has been a concern of mine for quite a while about local boards being overwhelmed by the process of duplicating these online ballots. And I think, if my memory is correct, that in the 2018 general, it was 38,000. Does that number sound right?
I'd have to go back and look it up. Sorry.
All right. Well, my memory is usually pretty good, and I think that's what it was. I was expecting to see the online ballot delivery drop because it's a primary and because everyone had been mailed a pre-printed ballot. So the number 40,000 is alarming, I think. That's a lot of ballots to duplicate, and this was just a primary.
I think it was, again, we don't have all the data yet, but it seemed like voters who didn't receive their ballot in the mail were using electronic ballot delivery to obtain their ballot rather than voting in person. So I don't know whether comparisons to primarily in-person elections can be compared to this, just because it was such a different way. And this was the tool that voters were using to vote at home instead of voting in person if they didn't get their mailed ballot.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it seems like they're pretty similar to the 2018 general. I remember that a surprisingly small number of voters using online ballot delivery were UOCAVA voters. And of course, UOCAVA voters are entitled by federal law to receive their ballots digitally. Now, out of the other category, the big category, 36,610 were sent to domestic civilian voters. Now, some of those voters would be disabled voters, and they are also entitled by law to receive their ballots over the internet. Then after that would be people who were unable to receive a ballot any other way. And it just seems to me that's probably a pretty small number. I think people are turning to this in bigger and bigger numbers. And I'm worried that we do not have the technology to scan these ballots. That leaves us with only one option, which is to hire temporary workers to duplicate these ballots by hand. And 40,000 ballots having to be duplicated by hand, that's a lot of ballots. And I was hoping to see this number decline in this primary because everyone had been mailed a pre-printed ballot. But the number's continuing to climb, and I'm expecting now that it'll be even higher in the general. And I don't know what else we can do to support the local boards that have to do this work. In a small county, it's not such a big problem, but you get into the bigger counties, and boy, this is a job. It takes weeks and hundreds of workers And so it raises security concerns, it raises cost concerns, and I'm still convinced that the majority of people using this are just doing it because it's easy and not because they really need it or because they just like it. So I'm worried about this. It would be interesting to see a comparison. I think I have the numbers in my file somewhere.
Sure, we can certainly dig it up. We just don't have it handy at the moment.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
So it comes back to me. So there were about 35,000 voters who voted statewide at the 44 vote centers. 21 of the vote centers were open beyond 8 p.m. for voters who were in line, and obviously all of those voters were provided the opportunity to vote and voted. So as we've sort of said in a couple of different ways, that this election certainly was a new way of voting for most voters, and it was conducted in unprecedented times, and it posed significant challenges for us. And there are areas that we could do better, and we will do better. Wanted to just highlight a few of the challenges that we've had. We've previously shared our disappointment with the vendor that did the mailing. It wasn't limited to Baltimore City, but those issues were significant. We have already briefed all of you on the mailing schedule for Baltimore City ballots and how they were mailed late, and we were unaware of the lateness of the mailing. There was also the printing of a wrong ballot for Baltimore City Council District Number 1, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit later. In Prince George's County, 90,000 voters received the Spanish version of the instructions and list of vote centers and not an English version in the same mailing. There was a subsequent mailing that included it, a court-ordered notice that was not included in the ballot packets for Hagerstown voters, delays in the schedule for Montgomery County, and of course, ballots from South Carolina that arrived in the USPS system with our ballots. So as we look to November, we are evaluating all of our options, looking to see what our options are under the current contract, and to see if there are other ballot printers that can provide ballots that our voting system can count and be part of our team for November. We are looking to build in more vendor accountability into the contract and expand our team to manage the contract. An election with a significant number of ballots delivered by mail needs to have the same kind of support as a significant in-person voting operation. And because of the quick turnaround time, we need to beef up that team and provide more support like we do for an in-person voting operation. So the second challenge to talk about was the election night removal of results from Baltimore City. We acknowledge that removing those results from our website led to questions and concerns, and that we should have been quicker in releasing a statement explaining what happened. We did release it the day after the election, mid-morning, but to be fair, should have done it sooner. We did provide the vendor with a corrected ballot for City Council District 1, but the outdated, incorrect ballot was the one that was printed. And so what that meant is that when the voting system counted the ballots for District 1 and judge of the circuit court, it counted it incorrectly. When we saw that the results for that district looked wrong, we didn't know at the time what the problem was and how many contests were affected. I mean, we know that now, and we knew that several hours later, but at the time we didn't know. And so out of an abundance of caution, we took down all the city results. Again, we should have been quicker to explain what happened, and we are already working to put a process in place to do that, should we ever need to do that in the future. In response to the public health emergency, you all had lots of discussions about the number of vote centers, and they were limited. You authorized, about a week before the election, you authorized 2 additional vote centers in Baltimore City, and we were able to obtain 10 more of the custom ballot drop-off boxes for Baltimore City. But there was more demand for in-person voting than in some areas of the state than we had supply. Voters whose ballots were returned by the post office as undeliverable were marked as having voted. There were about 1,200 voters statewide that were required to vote a provisional ballot on election day for this reason. Although almost 800 of them would have had to vote a provisional ballot anyway, because they were providing us either with a new address or a change to the change to their party affiliation. And so certainly the provisional voters who provided a new address, those provisional ballots were counted. This is an example of something that came about by moving to a vote by mail election. In the past, if a voter asked for a ballot by mail, they provided us with the address where they wanted it to be mailed. So there was a very recent communication about where, and a voter initiated communication about where the ballot was to be mailed. And so it meant that we had very few absentee ballots returned as undeliverable. In future elections, these voters won't be coded as already voted if they show up in person, and so that they can vote a regular ballot if they haven't moved, or a provisional ballot in case they have. There were 82 voters in a Baltimore City Council district that received the wrong ballot. So these were voters in City Council District 12 who received a ballot for District 14. This was the result of a new apartment building being built, and the building's address was placed in the wrong City Council district. Again, there were 82 voters eligible for this election that were impacted, and as soon as the City Board of Elections learned of it, they notified voters, they personally delivered corrected ballots to some, and then instructed others that they could vote a provisional ballot. This occasionally happens, and because of that, we have already started the process of moving away from a manual assigning of streets to districts to using a more automated GIS process. This should reduce the likelihood of error, and we'd already, as I said, already started on this in preparation for the 2020. We have talked at prior meetings about the changing of the date printed on the ballots. And this happened because the ballots were designed when we were having a combined special general and primary election. And then when they were split, we had talked through lots of different options and decided that using ballots with the April 28th date posed the least risk to the election, as long as we provided adequate notice to voters that that date would have no impact on their ballots being counted. So we did that. We put that information in the instructions that every voter received, and it was a key message and part of our voter education campaign. It's fair to say that this is fair criticism, no doubt about it. It's a function of timing and risk, and we made the best decision that we could, understanding that we needed to educate voters about it. And we subsequently learned that other states were faced with the same decision, same choice, and some of them made the same decision that we did. And so with that, that's sort of wrapping up through election day and the results. And then, of course, in addition to counting ballots for several weeks, the local boards of elections also started doing some audits, and our team did some audits too. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tracy to talk about the automated ballot tabulation audit that we do after every election and where we are with that.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Phase one of the automated ballot tabulation audit, which Clear Ballot is our vendor. Phase one of the automated tabulation audit of ballot images is mostly complete, and phase two is well underway. Phase one includes all ballots that were counted during canvassing prior to and up to Election Day, as well as all ballots that were cast on Election Day in voting centers. Before certifying the election results, each local board received 4 phase one reports comparing the voting system's results against the results from the independent tabulation performed by the automated audits software. And these reports showed that 1, the voting system and Clear Ballot tabulated the same number of ballots, which are called cards cast in the audit software. Number 2, that any differences between the two systems' results were less than 0.5%. And 3, that the voting system accurately tabulated the results. As I said, phase 2 is underway, and I expect to be completed mostly by late next week. The voting system, after completion of the canvasses and prior to the State Board of Canvassers certification of these election results, all ballot images are retabulated and a second set of reports are issued. Like phase 1, these reports should confirm again that the voting system accurately tabulated the ballot images from all canvases. Phase 1 comparison reports and automated audit results, which are generated before we provide the voting system's results to the vendor, are posted on SVE's website, and the phase 2 reports will be posted as we receive them. And I guess I'll hand it back to Nikki.
Did you want to do the comprehensive audit?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry, I didn't even see the next part. So the other audit that we do is the post-election comprehensive audit, which is an audit of critical parts of the election. And that has begun. The voting system division reviews data associated with pre-election logic and accuracy testing, opening times of the election day vote centers, reviewing of discrepancies between the number of voters who check in to vote and the number of ballots cast, and performs the voting system verification. Aaron Perrone and Courtney Bryant collect and review various documents from local boards to complete other auditing tasks, including ballot accounting forms. And an audit, this part I do, an audit is also performed on absentee and provisional ballots from each local board and the canvassing minutes.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Mary, did you want to do the next voter registration section?
Certainly. So under the law, voter registration reopens on June 15th. So we need what we call close the election in MD voters. And closing enables us to obtain important information, data, put voting history to a voter's record, and then the local boards can start processing their voter registration applications and changes to voter registrations.
Thanks, Mary. So we've been asked to participate in 2 post-election briefings. Last week, I did one with a coalition called Baltimore Votes. They had invited me before the election to participate in some webinars to talk about the changes, and then invited me back to share their thoughts with me on the election and for me to hear their concerns and provide feedback. So I did that. And then, as Mike, the chairman, already talked about, was our briefing on Tuesday before. It was a joint briefing hosted by the Senate's Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. They asked to address several topics, from list maintenance to the mailing process to outreach to certain voters, vote centers, and collaboration. And so we provided them with that information and had a lively discussion for, it was about a 2-hour hearing. So that is the end of our preliminary review. Again, more data is coming. Just as Mary said, once the MD voters needs to be closed for us to be able to get that data.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Does anyone, this is it won't be the last time, I don't think, although after this it will be more focused. Thoughts, comments, questions about the June 2nd election or its implications for the November election? Anyone have anything? I have things that I want to raise. Malcolm, go ahead.
Yes, Mike. I have a couple of questions, issues. I listened in at the hearing on Tuesday, and I felt that some of the questions that were directed to the state board perhaps should have been directed to the local board. I may be wrong, because sometimes we don't have control over what takes place at the local situation as to the timing and the number of people there. And perhaps the locations may have been smaller than they should have been to accommodate the crowds. And I'm thinking we need to work with the local boards to find out some method or some way to monitor the size of the crowds and size of the people in the line. But specifically, I thought I heard at the hearing that they said a number of unaffiliated voters showed up at the primary. Now, I guess my question is, did they not understand that unaffiliated voters do not vote in the primary, or did they show up to change their voter affiliation so they could vote? Is there any data on that?
This is Nikki. I can tell you that in a primary election, the most the most common reason for a rejected provisional ballot is because people either are unaffiliated or don't have a ballot in that election, or they want to vote the other party's ballot. So it is a very common occurrence in a primary election to have people do one of the two things you mentioned. They're either not eligible to vote in this election and think that they are, or they come and they want to change their party. And they, of course, get a provisional, and they are rejected unless there's some administrative error that's been made that's updated and then counted. But that is a very common occurrence in a primary election.
Well, I guess my question is, now you can register at the election. So if you can register to vote at the election, do you still have the same right to change party affiliation at the election? Is that not a form of registering?
The law does not allow for same-day party changes. It allows for registration and address change, but not party affiliation.
Okay. I'm wondering if there should be more communication, not necessarily from the state, but from the local boards, informing those unaffiliated voters. The other question I had was, is there some method to prevent a large number of undeliverable ballots? If you could send a postcard to that address sometime and to verify that address and then mail the ballots out. I know that perhaps takes more time, more work, and it's more costly, but I'm just wondering if that would be beneficial. Is that something we should think about?
If I may, this is Mike, if I may jump in to coordinate with Malcolm's question. We have effectively spent a lot of money and a lot of effort training Maryland voters that if they sit at home and do absolutely nothing, a ballot will appear in their mailbox. And that is not the way that we want to run elections. It's not the way I want to see us run elections, and I suspect there's a lot of other people who feel the same way, and probably for many of the similar reasons, and there's many reasons. So we also, I think, in the next election, as we feel our way into it, once we have guidance, we're either going to have a completely open election, we're going to have a completely mail election with the very small opening for election for voting centers, or we're going to have a hybrid, which is where I think we're going to end up. And in any of those configurations, given the fact that we have a lot of, well, considering what we've been through, we have a lot of lead time. I'd like to see us with a plan to start re-educating voters and putting them on alert, and which may, and this is where it coordinates with Malcolm's question, also tell us about addresses that are undeliverable. So do you have some thoughts about that, the questions as a whole? Nikki, Linda?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a question or a statement. So,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So I'm happy to respond either way, I guess. So yes, we have started thinking about what additional mailings and what creative ways we can come up with to get current address information for voters, regardless of the way the election is being conducted. And also recognize that there will need to be some kind of communication plan to either re-emphasize this type of election, if that's how it's going to be run, or to educate voters as to what kind of election it will be, whether it's the normal process or a slightly different process. So all great questions and ideas and ideas that we are taking and comparing it, also looking at best practices from our colleagues in vote by mail states and how they do this since they have experience with it, many for several years, and we will take the best practices and apply them here.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions or issues or thoughts?
This is Kelly. We received a lot of correspondence from different people, so I no longer remember who reported this, but somebody said that there were instances of ballot drop-off boxes being overstuffed. And I spoke to the people at the Prince George's County Board, and they did not have that problem. So I was just wondering whether that's just a rumor or did that actually happen?
Again, like you, the letters have started to sort of mix together. So as we go through them, if we, some of our response is, can you provide us with more details, like which county, which location, so we can do a deep dive to see if it actually happened. The local boards of elections were instructed to empty them twice a day, at least twice a day. So again, we just need to go back and see which location, and if we don't have that, try to get that from the letter writer so we can really look into that and see what happened.
Okay. I had another question. We didn't know that the ballots weren't being delivered until quite a bit after they were supposed to be delivered. And I'm wondering why there was no sort of tracking feature so that we would know where the ballots were. Is there something that's available that we could do in the future?
So we did have access to United States Postal Service data through the portal that our vendor provided us. We learned that the data wasn't updated in real time, so we did need to wait for loads, and had some varying experience with when they were first scanned by the post office. That's when we first see it in the portal. So that's one of the things that we are looking to improve. Is there a better data source for us? Is there, can we piece it with data that the post office provides to us directly? Some other accountability for the vendor. So all of those things are what we're looking at to build into the contract moving forward.
So if my memory is correct, the Baltimore City ballots were supposed to be mailed May 8th. And we didn't know that they hadn't been mailed until something like the 15th. Is that right? And is it the case that the Postal Service's dashboard that would have allowed us to track this wasn't updating during that time?
Well, guess I'm going to ask Andrea if this is a question that we should answer here or in closed session.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's probably best, since it has to do with performance under the contract, and that's something that the administrative staff and legal counsel are examining right now. I think that would probably be a question best asked in closed session as it relates to sort of the potential factual bases for potential claims.
Thank you, Andrea. Kelly, anything else?
No, that's all I had.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I have a few things.
Before you go, Mike.
Absolutely, you go.
I had one more question or concern. Looking at the plethora of letters that came in, there was one mentioning that an effort was not made to get incarcerated prisoners to vote. Some of them are eligible to vote because they just may be in holding. Is that our responsibility, or is that the local board's responsibility to take care of that? Hello?
Yeah,
yeah.
Mary, can you?
Good afternoon.
No, you have.
I can. We've been working with the advocates, Malcolm, in trying to set up a program, actually testing it statewide. There was some legislation introduced that Jared and I were championing through. It never got through so that we could actually not only test it, but track it. And unfortunately, it failed in the 11th hour, but we are still working very closely with the advocates to set up a program to address this issue.
Okay, thank you. But is that the state's responsibility to follow up on that, or is it the local board's responsibility to follow up on that in the jurisdictions where these prisons may be located?
Currently, there is no program in place, which was why legislation was introduced and why we were trying to spearhead it at the state level. So again, we could track some information and get a program in place with corrections.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Aaron.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question real quick. It's okay.
Go ahead.
So are we, there's a lot of things we can learn from the second, and there's some things we can do differently if we had to do an all-mail election again. Has there been any motion from the governor's office as to what he may request for a November election? Has there been discussion around that to what has to be fixed or what would be moot because we would be in a regular election?
So we have shared with the governor's office the timeline and the need to know so that we can prepare for the appropriate election. In the meantime, however, we are preparing for both ways. And there was a second part of your question, and I just completely lost it.
No, I hear what you're saying. We're preparing for both ways. I'm hoping that we can do a normal election. If we do have to do a predominantly mail election, I would prefer to see more of a hybrid and some other things fixed that that I'm hoping we don't have to address. So what is the timing that we gave? Wasn't it like the end of this month, wasn't it, that we gave to the governor that we had to know by?
We did say June, yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, this is PJ. Quick question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Following up on Bill's question, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the governor asked for a report from the SBE. It's due July 3rd. Is that still accurate?
That is what we've heard the request for. In terms of timing, we don't think that Montgomery County Board of Elections will be finished until that week, so it will be difficult for us to have a report by that timeline. But we do understand that we need a report and have started working on it, but a lot of the data is going to be on hold until they finish their election.
Okay, the reason I asked that question is, have you communicated with the governor's office that because of the data may not be in, you may not be able to submit the report by July 3rd? I just don't want them holding up their decision about the November election by waiting for this report, if that makes any sense.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Nikki, this is Mike. I understand that the phrase that, we should deliver a report. What precisely is supposed to be in the report? Not what we put in, but what do they want in? Where do we go on this thing?
It was a report that was mentioned at a press conference, and we don't have any guidance other than what was said at the press conference.
Okay. Which was like 2 sentences, 1 sentence. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. I've got a few things, and if it triggers any other questions, this is probably the key thing that we're here for today, is the whole after action on June 2nd. In no particular order, because I was just jotting things down as we went along. Nikki, I think you said that we're going to be beefing up the mail team, MAIL, in anticipation of expanded vote by mail operations, pretty much in any configuration. It's certainly hybrid or vote by mail. Do we have the assets to be able to do this?
So we have a contract that supports the MD Voters Development and the poll book team that Keith reported on. And that is a staffing contract. And so we've started to look at labor categories in that contract that we might be able to get some resources in quickly to do that. So we do have a contract vehicle to do that, and have already started to look to see if there are skills. We think there are skills in that contract that we can get people to help that effort.
Okay. Next item, and this also is similar to what one of the other members has already asked. One of the, and you've answered it in part, one of the issues that was raised in at least one of the letters that came into us was that there were some polling places ADA violation issues. We didn't have ramps in, or there weren't parking spaces, and so on. And I know that your answer is, of course, we need specifics and whatnot. I don't remember whether there were any specifics with those allegations or not. But I would like to make a request that when we know something about that, I would like that to be reported back to the board.
Sure.
Because that's something that we, I can understand how it could happen, but I also understand that we don't ever want it to happen. Next item in my list, locations where there were lines. This is, I think Malcolm raised this initially. One of the things I would ask is, and I know that we have so many people sitting around just doing nothing, but in answering the questions about the lines, and I understand precinct boundaries change and that makes it difficult to track things over time, but if we could track to the degree that we can locations where we know that there are lines. In other words, in this election, June election, we identified or had identified for us by anecdotal reporting, by press reporting, and so on, that there were lines at certain locations. And I'm talking about inordinate lines. I would like to know if we have seen this same pattern in previous elections, because I think that will inform the board as to, it will be useful information to the board to determine where we might be going on this to resolve some of these issues. We always have complaints about lines, it seems, and that applies, I think, to probably just about every state. But if we're seeing patterns, then I'd like to identify the patterns and see if they're historical. And if they're historical, then that'll be useful information for us in addressing how we're going to address it. And so I would like to request that if we can, that we give some historical perspective on those. Next item. Again, this is just off of notes that I made, so I apologize for a little bit of jumping around here. The communications plan. The communications plan, I don't have a problem with it. It was fine, and it did a lot of what we wanted to do. But what I think I noted, and it may be that the people who did the plan would say, no. If you look in this part, you'll see that we covered everything you just said, and that's fine. I'm happy to be corrected. but I did not seem to notice that we had a significant outreach in the Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, generally in Asian population communities, the ethnic communities. And it would seem to me that that's a community that we would want to reach out to. I know that the issue came up with Montgomery County in an earlier series of discussions about voting centers and underserved populations. And that was the population group that was identified in the discussion. So that would be something that I would like to know about as the communications plan as we go forward. The other thing is that I noticed there were a number of faith institutions, but I think that those are faith institutions that were focused on specific ethnic groups. And what I'm wondering is why we don't use them to communicate to broader groups, since we're trying to get the word out to everyone when we want something done. And that includes, well, it includes every religion, you know, whether it be, you know, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, any other significant religious groups that we can identify, whether it includes evangelicals, whether it includes other churches within the larger Christian group. These are all groups that I think that we can, in a communications plan, also address. As the Board of Elections, it's our responsibility to try to communicate with every voter we have out there. And as we move forward, I am just expressing that I'm going to have an interest in looking to see whether, at least as far as I can tell, all the groups that I know of that don't seem to appear in the plan, that, you know, why are they not in the plan? Now, for the board members, you have, and it just came out right before we went on, but you have a document there in your materials which addresses the concept of having a third envelope. If you'll recall, in our materials, Montgomery County, so this is part of the June 3rd election. It's sort of a issue of, did we learn the lesson here that we need to apply to November? It's something that we've already looked at, and I believe that we have, I thought we had something out actually that had been put out about our policy on that. Montgomery County has asked for a third envelope, and we have already looked at that, as I understand, as I recall, and we had made a decision we would put it off to 2022. Montgomery County Board of Elections has sent a request to us asking for a third envelope. And we have already considered it, but again, we have a request which is tantamount to a request for reconsideration. And in that regard, I'm going to ask Nikki or Linda just to remind us of our thoughts and their concerns about the third envelope. Nikki, Linda, could you do that, please?
Sure. So I think there's been some discussion about whether adding a third envelope increases the time to canvass. So it's balancing the concerns of voters as expressed by the Montgomery County Board of Elections, and then the additional envelope to open and step in the canvassing process. We have over the years received a few complaints about this. I think the volume obviously increased because of the number of people that were voting by mail for the first time was new to them, and so they had questions about the process. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes. And now, the only board that we've heard from is Montgomery County. Is that correct? About this matter at this time.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And so we don't know whether the other boards would be favorable or unfavorable of this. Is that correct?
That's correct. Right. We don't know.
And does the administrator or deputy administrator have a thought as to the advisability of going forward with one county and another policy in another county?
Our preference on this issue is certainly that it be uniform statewide. It's a statewide contract, and managing it, it's important that they would all be in the same, I guess they would have the same number of envelopes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Given that the board has the Montgomery County letter in front of us, given what we've heard from Deputy Administrator on the subject matter, and given that this is something that we had already actually addressed, do any of the board members wish to address this matter further at this time?
This is PJ. I have a question. Do we have this letter from Montgomery County Board of Elections? Do we know how the other 23 LBs feel about the envelope?
We do not.
Can we find that out?
Sure.
So this is Bill Velp. I am an advocate, as I have said before, for a multi-envelope system that protects the secrecy of the ballot, and some way that we get a party affiliation and or things like that off the outside envelope that gets returned. So, things that move us in that direction, I am in favor of. But I do understand state contracts and the problem with time. So that's why I was very happy to capitulate to say, let's try to make this correct in 2022. But if it was thought it could be done in 2020, I would be in favor.
This is Malcolm. As you well know, I've always been an advocate of the 3-envelope system because of the privacy issue. But at the same time, I recognize that it's something that you don't do overnight. And perhaps it cannot be done for the November election. I think it's something we need to keep on the table and realize that perhaps we should strive toward that.
Mr. Chairman, this is PJ again. So it's clear. I'm a supporter of the privacy envelope also. And I think, and look, we have no idea yet what the November election is going to be, but I have this sinking feeling, and that's all it is a sinking feeling in my own gut that we could likely have a vote by mail election in November. But regardless, and the fact that we are in the process of possibly hiring a new contractor for the November elections, I think it should be given more thought and possibility of adding it.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, this is Donna May.
Sure.
As the historian, I find it somewhat ironic because Montgomery County certainly was the driving force to move us from 3 envelopes to the 2-envelope system. And it changed at a time when it gave each local election office the option, and they were performing their own individual operations, so to speak. It wasn't a statewide mailing house contract. They were each mailing out their own envelopes, printing their own material. So they went to the General Assembly and had the General Assembly actually change the law to allow for a 2-envelope process. As if we did not move this election to that process, I believe there may be an alternative that we could promote or offer. And I've not spoken to Nikki and Linda about this, so maybe speaking out of turn. But if a phone call came into us and they were concerned with signing the back of the envelope, we asked them to make a copy or handwrite the oath and place the signed copy inside the envelope and write on the back, the inside. So I don't know whether that provides some alternative for our upcoming one, and then of course, if they weren't worried about postage, they could put it inside of another envelope or use the drop box. So those were the alternatives we offered this election if someone asked about it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it's PJ.
Yes,
just a comment to that. While I appreciate your description of those alternatives that were given, I think that's a lot to ask of a voter. Even I was confused even listening to it. I mean, I look at Montgomery County's letter, and the law does say that a local board may use either 2 envelopes or 3 envelopes.
So what you're saying, well, and Andrea may be able to give us some guidance on that, but your reading of the statute is that the legislature has already placed the decision-making in the hands of the counties, but we're operating on a one-contract system to generate this package, if you will, of materials. So we have 2 things that seem to be not compatible. You know, one is that we have a contract to do a certain thing, and state law allows it to be done either way. So I'm not sure how that conflict plays out at this point. Obviously, it's fixable for the next election, the 2022 election. That it's easily fixable for that. But how is it fixable for this one? That's my question. It's not a statement.
Well, if I may, obviously the printer does not print 3.5 million ballots exactly the same. They are different. There's all the different ballot styles. I mean, there's a different ballot in Montgomery County than there is in Howard County, correct or not? I mean, depending on the elections that are on the ballot.
Sure.
Or the questions that are on the ballot.
Sure, but the problem is that the 3rd envelope has to be inserted into the package. So you're inserting on some and not inserting on the others. Now, that's just the obvious, that is apparent to me, but I think you'd also have to change the printing on the one. But be that as it may, the one envelope would be, you'd be adding another envelope. So for some counties, you would do it one way, and for other counties, you do it another way. And now I think we've got some time to get to the printer at this point. We're in June, and I'm thinking that we're not going to close out this and the actual, what the ballots and so on look like, which means that would be when they would go to the printer, until August or the beginning of August.
We just put out an RFI, request for interest by printers. So we're a long way from an RFP.
Nikki, Linda, what do you think about the discussion? And I'm talking from a feasibility standpoint here.
I have a response, but I'm not sure I can do it in open session.
Then we'll pick it up in closed session.
Okay, thanks.
So,
If we
Mr. Chairman,
do that, we should come back to open session in case they're based upon that answer. If we want, one way or the other, if we wanted to do 3 envelopes, we could give some direction to move that way, right?
well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, actually, I'm happy to have whatever discussion we need to have in closed session because it's a contractual type of issue. But I also would like to know the answer to my earlier question about, I got to think that all 24 LBEs, someone is listening to this meeting. I'd like to know how many of them want 3 envelopes and how many of them want 2. And maybe it's only Montgomery County, but I'd like to know. And I think that would help drive a decision.
all right, let me do it.
We can do that.
All right, let me try to see if this works. Today we'll go into closed session. We'll deal with this issue in closed session. At the same time, we'll put out, pursuant to Mr. Hogan's very appropriate request, we'll put out a query to the boards asking them what do they want. And between the closed session and the responses, if we're going to take action, and this is something I was going to mention at the end of the meeting anyway, I suspect we're going to be moving into another phase of relatively frequent board meetings, kind of like what we did back at the beginning, like the April time period. I think we may end up doing something like that over the next 6 or 8 weeks. So we'll know more about what we deal with in closed session, more about timing, and more about what the various boards think. And then we'll have those 3 pieces of information and can make a decision. And this board has been, well, from my perspective, it's been terrific about, hey, we need to have a meeting, in 4 days or whatever, and everybody makes the effort and we pull it together. Does that sound reasonable, Mr. Hogan?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Okay.
I have a question that if I could, and this would be to Andrea, based on the law in 9-310, where a local board may either use 2 envelopes or 3 envelopes. In your opinion, can the state board still mandate that we use 2 or 3, or are we out of that discussion?
Thanks for the question, Bill. Am I off of mute? Yes, I am. Thanks for the question, Bill. It's a good question. I note that there are regulations that this board has promulgated that govern the manner in which envelopes are prescribed to be used by the local boards. It looks like the form and the content of the envelopes of absentee ballots, and this is both the send out and return envelope, shall be as the state board prescribes. Now, it's a good question as to whether that regulation is ultra vires in the sense that it's not permitted by the permissive language in that statute. So, I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head. I'd have to investigate it.
Bill, that was a good question. But I think it leaves us at the same point that PJ and I were at, which is it's one more piece that we need to get in order to be able to make a decision or non-decision about the matter.
Yeah, I agree. As long as we can make that decision timely, even if we had to make an emergency meeting.
Well, we're all, You know, I'm always ready to call an emergency meeting. Shucks, I thrive on these things. But I believe if, and rather than what I believe, Nikki, do we have a couple of weeks in which to get this information pulled together before we would hit a window where we'd be out of the window to make a decision?
Yes, you do.
Okay, there we go. So the administrator will contact the local boards. The assistant attorney general will research the law, and we will receive counsel and guidance from the assistant AG. And then when we have all that data in, then we will either make a decision or declare that a decision is not necessary, or some third action that I'm not going to bother to try to hypothesize. Is that acceptable to the board members?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I go along with that.
Okay. With that in mind, then that's the action we'll take on that. Does anyone else have any other? We're going to be doing this for probably, I don't know how many weeks yet, but any other follow-up today at this time about the June 2nd election, especially as it pertains to the November election? Okay. Hearing nothing, then we'll move over to item number 6, Assistant Attorney General's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm going to go through our list as we usually do. I'm not going to update you on cases for which there is no update. So I'll move right to number 3 in your materials. This is the Judicial Watch case. Judicial Watch is seeking a list of the registered voters from Montgomery County. We've been through summary judgment in the case, and we have agreed to resolve the matter amicably with Judicial Watch in lieu of taking an appeal from the judgment issued by the district court. The district court has been apprised of our settlement and has dismissed the claims pending resolution of the parties or consummation of the parties' agreement. The next matter is the National Federation of the Blind case involving the state board's BMD policy. We have, since we last met and discussed the case, we have since obtained jointly with the plaintiffs an extension of several of the timelines for discovery and dispositive motions. In the case, court entered that order last week. Now discovery is scheduled to close on November 9th, and dispositive motions are due November 30th, 2020. Moving down to the Public Interest Legal Foundation case, that's number 6 on your handout. This is another matter involving an organization seeking access to a list of registered voters of Maryland. This one is for the statewide list, not just the Montgomery County list. The case, we had filed a motion to stay that case pending resolution of the Judicial Watch case. Now that we have resolved Judicial Watch, we are in discussions and have agreed in principle to resolve the Public Interest Legal Foundation case as well. So we're working that out with the plaintiffs there. The next matter is Chong Soo Yi versus Hogan. This is an individual who has filed several pro se actions against the governor regarding several issues with the 2018 election. Among other things, Mr. Yi alleges that those results should be set aside because of the use of houses of worship as polling places, because of the use of optical scanners to count ballots, because of the identification of party affiliations of candidates on the general election ballot. And there was one more that is eluding me now. In any event, he has filed a bunch of complaints in 2019, has filed an amended complaint or a new round of complaints after those were successfully dismissed. We're playing a bit of he files an amended complaint and we move to dismiss it, and he files another amended complaint, we move to dismiss that. We've been through that about 3 times now. So the latest version of his complaints were filed on June 7th. He has now added the state of Maryland itself as a defendant, in addition to Governor Hogan, and our response to those is due June 22nd. Maryland Green Party matter is a challenge brought by the Green Party and the Libertarian Party of Maryland to the signature thresholds for new parties to obtain recognition via petition in the state of Maryland. For a party, what a party gains by obtaining recognition is the right to nominate candidates to stand for the general election, any race in the state on the November ballot. The deadline for filing that petition to get on the ballot, to be able to nominate candidates to the ballot for this year's election was or is August 3rd. But the parties brought their lawsuit alleging that the 10,000 signature threshold, in light of the COVID-19 state of emergency, violates their constitutional rights under the First Amendment, because it is practically impossible to achieve that without the existence of large gatherings of people, festivals, etc., to be able to collect signatures. We've negotiated a resolution of that case with the plaintiffs and are in the process of finalizing that now. They are going to be obtaining some relief from that 10,000 signature requirement. The agreement is going to be approximately 50% or 5,000 signatures based on the cases that we've seen other courts in other states look at these issues, and there have been several since the pandemic started. That seems to be the sort of expected or reasonable resolution of the claims that they have filed. Since we last met, there has been a candidate for an independent candidate, or excuse me, an unaffiliated candidate has sought to intervene in the case. He filed his motion shortly before the parties agreed in principle to resolve their claims. His motion to intervene is still pending. We have reached out to him and are in discussions with him about potentially participating in this settlement agreement, but we have not reached agreement as of yet. Next matter is a new matter that was filed this week. The Committee for the Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority Mandate, Inc., and Samuel Jordan, who I believe is the chairman of that committee, have filed an administrative complaint with the State Board of Elections, naming Governor Hogan, Ms. Lamone, and the State Board itself as respondents. This is another petition case. This committee that is the complainant is a ballot issue committee. They are seeking to petition to amend the Baltimore City Charter to create a regional transportation authority governing transportation, public transportation issues around Baltimore. That petition is due under Maryland law. It works out to be the 27th of July. This year. It's 99 days before the election, and the petition, the signature requirement for that petition is set by Article 11A of the Maryland Constitution. For Baltimore City, it works out to 10,000 signatures. It's a function of population. I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's no more than 10,000 if that percentage results in a higher number than 10,000, as it does for Baltimore City. So the complaint is seeking a reduction in that amount to 500 signatures and is seeking relief in the form of the establishment of at least 2 in-person sites in Baltimore City to permit voters to complete and sign petitions in support of the proposed charter amendment. No other matters on my list. Happy to take any questions.
No questions? Thank you, Andrea.
Sure.
Okay, next item then. Approval of late fee waivers. Who's got that one? Jared?
That would be me. So in front of you is a memo dated June 18th to the board. There is 11 requests for waivers. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions for those 11. But I would make a motion to adopt the state administrators and the department's recommendations. We also, for your edification, denied 8, and they are in there as well. And happy to answer any questions on the denials.
Anybody have any questions for Jared? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the waiver requests which have been distributed in advance to the board. So the state will entertain a motion to approve those approvals. May I have such a motion?
This is PJ, so moved.
Second.
This is Kelly, second.
All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? None. The motion carries and the late fee waivers are approved.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Now the next item that I'm showing on here, did you approve any waivers on the, what is it called? The
Title 14, no. Title 14 was just, that was just there as a package for you, just to show you that they were all denied. There's no board action required. And by the way, item 8 about confidentiality requests, that was a holdover from the last agenda. We have no confidentiality requests.
Great, thank you. I was about to ask that very question. Okay, item 7 is completed. Agenda item 8 is struck. And that brings us to item 9, approval of extension of charter amendment petition filing deadline. Nikki? Andrea?
Yeah, it's definitely not me. So,
Well, I can handle this too with Donna if you want.
Sure.
This is just we're still under the extensions where we can extend deadlines within your powers. And since this is the last board meeting before the deadline for charter amendment petition filings, we wanted to, if you wanted to revisit it and to extend the deadline by 1 week to the first Monday in August, which would make it August 3rd, which is the same deadline for petition candidates to file their petitions. Additionally, the deadline, we would want to extend the deadline for when local, local council has to file the ballot language with us for the charter amendments by 1 week as well, because their deadline was going to be that Friday of the week. So it was, I believe it was going to be July 31st. Now it will be the Friday of the week of the 3rd, which would make it August 8th. August 8th.
August 7th.
I'm sorry, August 7th.
Okay. Do we have a document on this that was provided, or was it?
It is the policy 02.
It was sent out about an hour, maybe before the meeting.
Okay.
Yes, it was under development all morning, or this morning. Andrea was.
Okay. Tearing his hair out.
And Mike, if I could just
Absolutely.
add to what Jared said, this was something I'm sure you remember this, but just to make it clear, this was something that the board considered. I don't know which meeting it was, but at one of those meetings in April, probably, but held back at the time because it wanted to, was concerned about the reliance interest. If this policy were to be promulgated then, and the state of emergency were to be lifted substantially before August 3rd, then the old deadlines would revert, and a party that was relying on that 1 week extension would find itself having to scramble. And so the board decided to put off until its meeting in June. Here we are on June 18th, to reconsider this to see if there was still an emergency at the time, and it seemed foreseeable that emergency, to the best of the board's abilities to tell, but seemed foreseeable that it would continue through July. and B, whether, given that, it made sense to enact this this extension, which under the governor's order of March 12th gives agency heads or boards like yours the authority to suspend the effect of deadlines, statutory deadlines in statutes over which it has the responsibility to administer. So that's kind of the background as to how we got here. The governor's order requires the state board or an agency head to make a finding that the suspension at issue, suspending the effect of these statutes, would not be contrary, would not endanger the public health, welfare, or safety. And then the requirement is that a public notice must be drafted and that the governor's office needs to be provided with the policy and the public notice in advance of its going into effect. And so the policy that's been presented to the board articulates the extension or the suspension of those deadlines by 1 week. It makes the finding that doing so would not endanger the public health, welfare, or safety. In fact, it would enhance it, and then directs the state administrator to develop a public notice consistent with this policy and to transmit the policy and the public notice to the office of the governor. It's there in front of you, but I figured I would to summarize it for you.
And an excellent summary. It wasn't even jogged my memory. Does any member of the board have any questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts about this? After Andrea's very good summary and memory jogging session, and with no questions or comments from the board, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the extension of charter amendment petition filing deadline. May I have such a motion?
So moved. This is Bill.
This is PJ. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? None. The approval, the extension of charter amendment petition filing deadline is approved. Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Next item, old business. I don't believe there is any that I know of. Well, actually, that could have been. Hearing nothing. New business. Hearing nothing. Moving to item number 12, disclosure of campaign contributions. Does anyone have anything to disclose in terms of campaign contributions? Not looking for general, admissions of culpability in any other areas. Okay. The chair will note that I have pointed out before that I need to provide some more detail, but that I have made contributions and I don't have the detail this time either. But I have made contributions to the Trump for President campaign, to the National Republican Senatorial Committee, to the National Republican Congressional Committee, to the NRC, National Republican Committee, and to the Maryland Republican Party, generally in amounts of between $35 and $100 as to each contribution. And I really will have this for the next meeting. Does anyone else have anything? Hearing nothing, and moving to the next item, schedule next meeting. Okay. Looking.
That would normally be on the 23rd of July, I think.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's going to work for us. Nikki, Linda, do you all have any sense of whether we're going to need a meeting more quickly than that?
This is Nikki. I would say let's put that one on the calendar, the normal, and then I think that depending on the report, probably would need one before it's due for submission.
Okay. Never hurts to put it on. All right. So That would be 23rd of July, I think is what we said. Is everyone okay with 23rd of July?
I'm okay.
Anybody have a problem with it?
It's fine with me.
Okay. Then let's say 2:00 on Thursday, the 23rd of July.
Do we have a sense on if this will be in person or still like this?
Don't know. It's going to depend on state guidelines, really, since we're a state entity. And I did raise the question as to whether this meeting would be in some way physical. And the answer was that the state guidelines were to maintain this type of status. So we'll have to see as we move on whether which way we're gonna do it. All right. So give me just a moment. Go ahead.
This is TJ. So are we canceling the meeting for next Thursday, the 25th?
I believe we are, because Nikki's already indicated. Now, we have an item that we effectively tabled, kind of pretty informally, but we effectively tabled the question of the 3 envelopes and so on. So it may be that we're going to be pulling together a meeting more quickly than late July. I would certainly hope it wouldn't take that long to get this all pulled together.
Right. Okay.
So I'm thinking out of an abundance of caution to give everybody as much time as possible. I would ask the board to keep it on your calendars in the sense of, don't schedule something in its place if possible. And that'll give a week, and that week may be enough for our attorney and our local boards and our staff to pull together the information that we had requested. And if that's the case, since we know those calendars are clear for next week, then we can go ahead and do it. If it turns out not, as soon as we know that that's not going to work, I'll ask the staff to put out an email releasing that date, and we'll see what we're going to reschedule for. I think that's probably pretty reasonable way to approach it. Is everybody okay with that?
Could you just recap that for me? So we're setting up a meeting for the 23rd, and we already had one for the 25th scheduled, and we're going to keep that one in case we're ready for it, for that one piece of business? Yeah,
and the one that for next week, the 25th, that'll be by telephone for sure.
Right.
So nobody has to be pinned down to a particular location. And if we do that, I want to make it as short a meeting as possible.
So we're basically, Mr. Chair, just deal with the envelope issue.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless, given the way things have been going for the last 80 days, another issue arises. But otherwise, yes, we'll just deal with the one issue, get that dealt with by telephone, and then that'll be it.
Great.
Okay. All right. With that, we're now at item 14, closed session for the public. The chair is going to request a motion to move into closed session. If that motion is approved by the board, then the board will adjourn the open session and move into a closed session meeting. We will not return back to open session. So we just want to give notice to the public that once we have adjourned in open session, we will not return today to open session. The board will now consider whether to meet in closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice as permitted by Section 3305B7 and 8 of the General Provisions article. Meeting in closed session would allow the members of the board to seek and obtain legal advice of board counsel without waiver of the attorney-client privilege and obtain information from staff about pending or potential litigation. May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved, Malcolm.
Second?
Second, Bill Velt.
All those in favor, aye.
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 The chair finds the motion has passed. The board will meet in closed session in accordance with exemptions B7 and 8 of Section 305 of the Open Meetings Act. And I propose that we meet in closed session at 4 p.m. That'll be about a 10-minute break for everyone to stretch their legs a little bit. And I will see you, talk with you in closed session. And thank you to all members of the public for listening to us as we went through our various items today. At this time, the chair asks for a motion to adjourn open session. I have such a motion.
This is PJ. So moved.
Second?
Malcolm, second.
Okay, all those in favor of adjourning open session, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion having passed, the chair declares that this open session is adjourned. Thank you all very much, and talk to some of you in the next few minutes.
Thanks.